Didn't pick up the phone when my daughter called that Tuesday morning. Not because I was busy. I was sitting right there at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, watching the screen light up with her name. I just didn't pick up, and that told me something about where we'd gotten to, the two of us. Let me back up. My name is Douglas. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, retired at 62 with a decent pension and a house in Naperville that I'd paid off 15 years before I walked out of that office for the last time. My wife Helen passed away 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. That kind of loss reshapes a man in ways he doesn't fully understand until years later, and I'm still not sure I fully understand it now. After Helen died, my daughter Audrey became the center of my world. She was 31 then, married to a man named Shad, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and had a way of talking that made everything sound like a sales pitch, including conversations at the dinner table. They had one son together. My grandson, Oliver, who was 4 at the time and had Helen's eyes. Same shade of grey-green that would catch the light a certain way and make you catch your breath. I threw myself into being useful. That's how I'd always dealt with grief. Keep your hands busy, keep moving, find a problem and fix it. And there were plenty of problems to fix. Chad and Audrey had bought a house in Geneva, about 20 minutes from mine. Nice neighborhood, good school district, more house than their income probably justified. I knew that going in, but I didn't say anything. Helen would have said something. Helen was always the one who could speak a hard truth without making it feel like a verdict. I was never as good at that. Their basement flooded 6 weeks after they moved in. Faulty sump pump and drainage that had been improperly graded. I could see it the moment I walked down there. I hired the crew, paid the invoice. $11,000. I told myself it was a gift, a housewarming gift, just delayed. The following spring, Audrey mentioned that their HVAC system was making a noise. I came over, looked at it, called my guy. The whole system needed replacing. Another $8,000. I wrote the check. Chad's car needed a transmission rebuild around that time. I offered to split it with them. Chad said he'd handle it, and then 2 weeks later mentioned offhand that he hadn't gotten around to it and was borrowing Audrey's car for work, so I just had it done, didn't make a thing of it. I want to be honest here, because I've thought about this a long time since. I wasn't doing it purely out of love, or not only out of love. I was doing it because fixing things was the only way I knew how to be present in their lives. Helen had been the emotional center of our family. She'd known how to just sit with people, how to be with them without needing to accomplish anything. I never learned that. So I fixed basements and replaced heat pumps and paid invoices and told myself that was the same thing. Oliver started kindergarten, and I paid for after-school care because Audrey had gone back to work part-time and the costs added up fast. I didn't keep a running total. I wasn't keeping score. That's what I told myself anyway. Then Audrey got pregnant with their second, a girl. They named her Bea, short for Beatrice, which had been Helen's mother's name. When Audrey told me that, I cried in my car on the way home. The good kind of crying. The kind that empties something out and leaves you lighter. I helped them out of bedroom, not a check this time. I was there on the weekends with a contractor I trusted, making decisions, overseeing work, making sure it was done right. Chad was around for some of it. He'd bring me a beer around noon and watch for a while, and then drift back inside. I didn't say anything about that either. The hospital bills from Bea's delivery ran higher than they expected. There were complications, nothing dangerous, but enough to push the out-of-pocket costs up significantly. I covered the balance. Around $14,000. By the time Bea was a year old, I had given them somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 over 4 years, not counting my time, not counting the weekends, the project management, the calls I made on their behalf to contractors and insurance adjusters, and the HOA when they had a dispute about their fence line. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound like a martyr. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the ground I was standing on when everything changed. It started small, the way these things usually do. I had a habit of stopping by on Sunday afternoons. I bring pastries from the German bakery in town that Helen and I used to go to every weekend. Oliver loved their bear claws. I'd sit with him at the kitchen table and he'd tell me about his week, and Audrey would make coffee, and for an hour or so it felt like things were okay, like the family I still had was intact enough. Somewhere in the second year after Bea was born, the Sunday visit started feeling different. Audrey would seem distracted, Chad would be in the other room, always on a call or just finishing something up. Oliver still greeted me at the door, but even he seemed to pick up on some low-level tension he couldn't name. I started texting before I came. Then I started asking if it was a good time. Then one Sunday Audrey said it wasn't great. They had plans, maybe next week. I said of course and drove back home and sat in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't felt since Helen died. That particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with being made to feel that you are too much. I kept it to myself. I didn't say anything to Audrey. I didn't want to be the father who guilt-trips his daughter, the old man who makes everything about himself. I knew that type. I didn't want to be that type. But things escalated. In February, I dropped off a birthday card for Oliver. He was turning 9, and inside the card was a check for $100, which I knew he'd want for his gaming account or whatever the current thing was. I rang the doorbell. Chad answered. He looked surprised to see me, not pleased surprised, just surprised, and said Audrey was at the store and that Oliver was at a friend's house. I handed him the card and said to tell them I came by. He nodded and closed the door. I was on the front porch in February in Illinois, watching my breath cloud in the cold air, and I thought, he didn't invite me in. He didn't say, come in and wait, she'll be back in 10 minutes. He took the card and closed the door. I drove home. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe he was on a call. Maybe he had something on the stove. But I knew. You get to be 67 years old and you know. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Audrey. I was getting ready for bed, and my phone lit up on the nightstand, and I read it standing there in my bathroom doorway in my undershirt. Dad, we need to talk about something. Chad and I have been feeling like we need more space to grow as a family. We love you, but the drop-ins and the involvement in everything has been stressful. We'd like to figure out a new arrangement where we have more breathing room. We hope you understand. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand and stood there for a long time. I thought about the sump pump. I thought about the bedroom addition. I thought about the hospital bills. I thought about 14 years of Sunday pastries and German bakery bear claws and sitting at that kitchen table watching Oliver grow up and feeling like, despite everything, I was doing all right by Helen's memory. And then I thought, fine, not the angry kind of fine, the kind people say through their teeth when they mean the opposite. I actually decided in that moment to accept it. Completely. If they wanted space, I would give them space. Not as a tactic. Not as a way of teaching them a lesson, just because I was 67 years old, and I had given everything I had to give, and I was tired, and the most dignified thing I could do was step back and let the cards fall. I texted back, I understand. I respect that. I didn't sleep well that night, but I slept. The next morning I made calls. The first was to my attorney. I didn't change my will, not yet. But I had a conversation about the structure of things and what I wanted to be clear about going forward. The second was to the bank. I had been listed as a co-signer on Chad and Audrey's home equity line of credit, something they'd needed when they refinanced, and I'd agreed to it without much thought. I initiated the process to remove myself. The third was to the service I used to pay Oliver's after-school care. I called and gave notice that the automatic payments from my account would stop at the end of the month. I wasn't doing any of this in anger. I want to be clear about that. I was doing it because the arrangement that had justified those payments no longer existed. They wanted to be an independent family with breathing room. Fine. Independent families pay their own bills. I didn't call Audrey to tell her what I was doing. She'd ask for space. I was giving her space. March went by. I did what I always do when I need to get out of my own head. I took on a project. Repainted the garage interior, organized the shelves in the basement, started walking every morning, which I hadn't done regularly since before Helen got sick. I'd walk down to the park 2 blocks over and sit on the bench near the pond and watch the geese and drink my coffee from a thermos and try to remember what it felt like to just exist without needing to be useful to anyone. It was harder than I expected, but not impossible. In April, Audrey called. I answered this time. She didn't mention the text message. She asked how I was doing, said the kids were good, mentioned that Oliver had started a travel soccer league. Normal conversation. I was pleasant. I kept my voice even. I asked about Bea. She said Bea was into dinosaurs and would tell anyone who stood still long enough about sauropods. I laughed at that. It was a real laugh. Before we hung up, she mentioned almost in passing that they'd gotten a letter from the bank about the HELOC. I saw that, I said. Were you? She paused. Were you removing yourself as cosigner? Yes. Another pause. Can I ask why? I thought it made sense given the new arrangement, I said. You wanted independence. This is part of that. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, okay. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't. I don't want you to feel like you were being pushed out. I don't feel that way, I said. And I meant it. We said goodbye and I sat with the quiet in my kitchen for a while. 3 weeks after that, Audrey called again. The call came at 7:30 in the morning, which was unusual. I'd just come in from my walk. She said Oliver's after-school program had sent them a bill for 2 months back payment. Yes, I said. I ended the automatic payment at the end of February. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry about that. She was quiet. Then, Dad, we can't really, Chad's territory got restructured and his commission rate changed and we're figuring some things out. And I understand, I said. You'll figure it out. Could you, Audrey? I said her name the way I used to say it when she was a teenager and was about to ask me for something she already knew the answer to. You asked for space to grow as a family. I'm giving you that. That means the financial piece too. She didn't push. We said goodbye, and I got in the shower and stood under the hot water longer than I needed to. Summer came. I heard less from them. I get a text here and there, a photo of the kids occasionally. Oliver sent me a voice memo for Father's Day that he'd recorded himself. He said, "Happy Father's Day, Grandpa. I love you. Also, I beat my record in Minecraft. And I listened to it 4 times and saved it in a folder I keep on my phone of things I don't want to lose." In August, Audrey's car had a problem. Something with the alternator, the battery kept dying. She texted me about it, not asking for money, just mentioning it, the way you mention things to a parent out of habit. I said it sounded like the alternator, told her a good shop nearby. She said they already had it at a place but the estimate was high. I said, "I'm sure you'll work it out." She said, "Yeah." That was the whole conversation. In September, I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was Chad. Chad never called me. We had the kind of relationship where we were cordial when in the same room and essentially strangers at a distance. So when his name came up on my phone on a Wednesday afternoon, I set down the book I was reading and answered. He started with small talk, which was worse than if he'd just gotten to it. Weather. The Cubs. How I was finding retirement. I let him go through it. Then he said, "So I wanted to talk to you about the HELOC thing." I said, "Okay." He said their rate had adjusted, and with his commission restructure and some credit card balances they'd run up, the monthly payment had gotten tight. He wasn't asking me to go back on the loan, he said. He just wanted to have a conversation about it. What kind of conversation? I asked. A pause. About whether there was any way you could help out. In the short term. I looked at the ceiling of my living room for a moment. It needed repainting. I'd been meaning to get to it. "Chad," I said. "A few months ago, Audrey sent me a message saying you two needed space to grow as a family and wanted to establish a new arrangement." I respected that. I stepped back. I removed myself from your financial arrangements. I stopped the payments I'd been making. All of that was consistent with what was asked of me. He didn't say anything. "I'm not angry," I said. "I want you to know that. I don't hold any of this against you or Audrey, but I can't keep stepping in financially at the same time I've been asked to step back personally. Those two things don't go together." More silence. "I hope the situation improves," I said. "I mean that." We said goodbye and I sat with it for a while. Then I got up and took out my painting supplies and started working on the living room ceiling. October came. I'd been in a rhythm. My walks, my projects, a Thursday night poker group I'd rejoined after years away, calls with my brother in Phoenix. My life had gotten quieter, and, I realized, considerably more peaceful. One evening in late October, I was on the porch watching the last of the leaves come down from the oak in my front yard. My neighbor Felicia came by walking her dog, and we talked for a while about nothing in particular. Her son's new job, whether the potholes on our street would ever get fixed, the usual. After she walked on, I sat there in the dark for a while, listening to the neighborhood settle in tonight. My phone buzzed. A text from Audrey. "Dad, can I come over this weekend?" "Just me. I'd like to talk." I typed back, "Of course. Saturday works." She came Saturday morning. I made coffee and had pastries from the German bakery. I still went every week, old habit. She sat at my kitchen table the way she used to when she was in high school and had something on her mind. She'd always done this thing where she'd wrap both hands around her mug and stare into it first, working up to it. She told me that things had been harder than she let on. Chad's income had dropped significantly with the restructuring, and they'd had to pull from savings for the HELOC payments. Oliver's after-school program had gone to a cheaper option. They'd sold Chad's car, and he was commuting with hers. I listened. I didn't say anything. She said, "I know things changed because of what I texted you, and I'm not coming here to ask for money, Dad. I need you to know that. I'm not here for money." I believed her. She said, "I think I confused two different things. I think Chad had been saying for a long time that he felt like we couldn't, that we hadn't really built our own life, that everything went through you. And I think that was partially true. I don't think I let us figure things out for ourselves the way we should have. I just always called you." She looked up from her mug. "But the way I did it was wrong. The text was wrong. I made it sound like you were the problem. Like you being there was the problem, and you were never the problem." I looked at my daughter, this woman who had Helen's stubborn jaw and my tendency to work around feelings instead of through them, and I thought about the bear claws going soft on the plate between us. "I missed Oliver's birthday drop-off," I said. She nodded. "I know. He asked about you. What did you tell him?" "That you were giving us some space and that he could call you whenever he wanted." She paused. "He calls you, doesn't he?" "He sends voice memos," I said. "I've saved all of them." She put her face in her hands, and her shoulders shook, and she cried the way you cry when you've been holding something for a long time and you finally set it down. I got up and put my hand on her shoulder and didn't say anything, because Helen had taught me in her last months when words stopped being enough, that sometimes that's all there is. After a while she collected herself and wiped her face and looked embarrassed, the way adults do when they cry in front of a parent. "I don't know what's going to happen with the house," she said, "or the HELOC, or any of it. That's something you and Chad will work through," I said. "I believe you will. Are you going to come back? I mean, the Sundays. Are we back to that?" I thought about it honestly. "I'll text first," I said. "We'll take it at whatever pace makes sense. But yes, I'm not going anywhere." She nodded. We sat at the table and I refilled her coffee, and she ate a bear claw and told me about Baya's obsession with sauropods. Apparently, Baya had informed her kindergarten teacher, with great authority, that a brachiosaurus could eat as much as 400 pounds of vegetation per day. Her teacher had sent home a note that said, genuinely, "Bea is remarkable." I laughed. I laughed the way I hadn't in a while. From somewhere lower down, somewhere real. A week later, on Saturday morning, I heard a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the door and opened it, and there was Oliver, 9 years old, in a jacket that was slightly too big for him, holding a paper bag from the German bakery. "Mum said I could walk over," he said. "I went and got bear claws." He held up the bag. "I got full because I didn't know if you already had some." I looked at this boy with Helen's eyes standing on my porch in the cool morning air with a bag of pastries. "I don't have any yet," I said. "Come in." He came in, and we sat at the kitchen table, the two of us, and he told me about soccer and Minecraft and a book he was reading about a kid who finds a dragon egg, and I made him hot chocolate, and I listened to every single word. The oak in the front yard had dropped most of its leaves by then. The light came through the window in the long, pale way it does in November in Illinois, and the house was warm, and my grandson was at my kitchen table eating a bear claw and telling me about dragon eggs. I thought about Helen. I thought about what she would have said, that steady, careful woman who always knew which things to hold on to and which things to let go. I thought I held the right one, but thought a lot about what actually happened between me and my daughter. Not the surface of it, the texts, the HELOC, the Sunday visits that stopped, but the thing underneath all of it. What made it possible? What made it inevitable? When you give without ever asking a person to stand on their own, you're not actually giving them something. You're quietly taking something. You're taking the chance they'd have had to find out what they're made of. I didn't understand that for a long time. I thought I was being a good father. I thought keeping the problem small for Audrey meant she'd have the energy for the bigger things. But what I was actually doing was making sure she never had to find out whether she could handle the bigger things. That's not love with wisdom behind it. That's love that's afraid of watching someone struggle. The hardest part of this whole stretch wasn't the text message, as much as it stung to read it. The hardest part was recognizing my own role in how we got there. Audrey didn't wake up one day and decide her father was too much. She grew into a life where the problems just got handled, where the call to dad solved it, where there was no reason to develop the particular muscle that only develops when there's no one to call. I built that, one check at a time, one contractor at a time, one Sunday visit at a time, where I told myself I was just being present, but was really just making sure I was still needed. What changed things wasn't the text. What changed things wasn't the text. What changed things was my decision to actually believe her. She said she wanted independence. I gave it to her, completely, without negotiation, without a speech. That's the part I'm most at peace with. Not because it worked out, though it did, but because it was the only honest response. You can't tell someone you respect their choices and then quietly stay in the same position, still holding all the strings. When Audrey came to my kitchen that Saturday morning in October and told me she'd confused two different things, wanting independence and cutting out her father, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired and relieved and sad, all at the same time, the way you feel at the end of something that cost more than it should have. She'd had to watch the life they'd built on someone else's foundation start to wobble before she could see what the foundation actually was. That's a hard way to learn. But some things you can only learn that way. Oliver showing up at my door with a bag of bear claws he'd bought himself. That was the moment I understood what had been preserved through all of it. Not the money, not the HELOC or the basement or the HVAC system, the relationship, the actual thing. The boy with his grandmother's eyes standing on my porch in a jacket slightly too big, doing something thoughtful on his own initiative because that was the kind of person he was becoming. I think about what I want to pass on to him. Not money, not a safety net that makes everything soft. I want him to know that dignity is its own kind of inheritance, that a man can be generous and still have a spine, that you can love someone completely and still say, "This part is yours to carry." I want him to understand, long before I'm gone, that the people in his life will respect him in proportion to how much he respects himself. That's not a hard rule or a cold one. It's just true. I didn't do everything right, but I did the last part right, and sometimes that's what matters most. Not where you started, but what you chose when you finally saw clearly.